Hey internets. So one thing a lot of people struggle with is the concept of per capita. Because the thing a lot of people get wrong on this one is that there's more to per capita than just per capita. Or really, there's just more to statistical reasoning than per capita. And so this is going to be a quick rant explaining the per capita thing in a bit more detail, why it matters, what it implies, but also when it doesn't matter or doesn't imply what it usually would. Now, the quick rundown of what per capita means is based on the Latin phrase that means by heads or for each head, and it's used to mean something per person, with the point being just recognizing the statistical reality that the averages of chances of something to happen often matter more than just the actual base amount of it happening. For example, in the United States, every year more people die as the result of peanut butter than they die as the result of fugu. Does this mean that peanut butter is more dangerous than pufferfish? No, absolutely not. Of course not. That's completely ridiculous. It's just that very few people are eating fugu. And when they are eating it, it's usually being prepared by a very skilled chef because we know that it's a dangerous food to eat. The toxins, if not properly removed, can cause someone to die of respiratory failure. And of course, the number of people who are even just trying to eat fugu are less than 1% of the people eating peanut butter. So that's just a basic example of why the reasoning of per capita is important. If we human beings were too dumb to have this per head concept, then we would be doomed to believe some really dumb things. Which, unfortunately, a lot of us kind of are. Especially when it comes to confirmation bias and believing that which we ideologically align ourselves with. I think the most obvious example of this was the man or bear question. If you're hiking in the woods, would you rather come across a man or would you rather come across a bear? All feminista nonsense and politics aside, the only thing about this question in the end that really matters is which one of the two is more likely to be dangerous. Say you're on a hiking trail and you find yourself face to face with another random man in the woods, or if you find yourself face to face with a bear in the woods. Which one is more likely to rip your face off? And which one is more likely to just be another fellow hiker and nod and wave at you and walk by you and do nothing? I don't know. This is a really tough question. So yeah, that's kind of just a silly clown world recent example. A lot of people got that one wrong. Part of it just simply because of cultural misandry and feministas being a little bit dumb, but another big part of it is just people genuinely not understanding per capita. There are a lot of people out there just citing the base core statistics of the fact that, oh hey, more men do a violent crime towards other people than say bear attacks happen per year. And a few of those people were just disingenuous pseudo-intellectuals, but a few of them seem to actually believe their own BS. They seem to not understand that it doesn't really matter the base number of bad things that men do per year and base number of bear attacks that happen per year. What matters is, in that moment, in the context of that question, who is more likely to do something bad to you? A man or a bear face to face? And of course, the answer is it's far more likely to be a bear, because per capita bears are more dangerous. That's really it. All of the other things about the discussion, there's some interesting things there. I even did a whole video on it. But ultimately, if you want to know the base reason why the side of saying that you would not want to pick the bear is right, it really just came down to per capita. And that's also just a good example of how a lot of people let politics get in the way of just obvious reasoning. And again, there have been many videos made on the whole man-bear question. But for this video, there's an additional thing here in regards to per capita that a lot of people miss. And this can be found by asking ourselves the question, okay, what is the solution to the bear question? Does the fact that bears are very dangerous per average encounter mean that the solution to the bear problem is that we should mobilize the entire United States military to hunt down and exterminate the bear menace? Sign up at your local recruitment station today so that you can participate in total bear death. Well, no, that's obviously a very dumb solution. Just because bears are dangerous per average encounter doesn't really mean you actually have to do anything about it. When things are working properly in nature, bears don't even end up interacting with us very much. Bears are considered a keystone species. They are good and necessary for the environment to work. Just because a bear encounter can be dangerous if you come face to face with them, that doesn't mean you actually have to do anything. The correct answer to the bear question is therefore to just leave them alone. Let the bears live deep in the forest where they belong and let them do their bear things. And I know that kind of sounds silly, but hopefully I'm making my point here, which is that just because there's a per capita issue doesn't automatically mean that your solution to that per capita issue is the best solution. There's usually more to the story, which means that if you're not careful, per capita can actually trap you in an oversimplification fallacy. There's a lot more to statistical reasoning, especially in regards to politics and philosophy, but also pretty much anything, than just per capita alone. There's often, yes, the dreaded word nuance involved. Like, here's another example I see often being thrown around. A post from PSA Sitch. This is the right-wing version of not understanding per capita. And it's quoting Shannon Hill. I don't see a single blue state, just blue cities trying to tell us how to live. And it's a map of the United States, mostly all voting red Republican, but then with a few blue dots. And of course, the issue here that PSA Sitch is pointing out is that, yes, those blue dots are less likely, but there's way more people living in those blue dots. When it comes to the two-party system of the United States, I think we kind of all know that Republicans tend to get a lot of votes from less populated rural areas, and Democrats tend to get a lot of votes from the more populated urban areas. Pretty basic stuff. And thus, when it comes to total votes, when you look at maps like this, it's entirely possible for there to be more total votes from the blue areas, or more per head if you're just looking at these districts as heads. And I often see a lot of times libs will make fun of Republicans for this, saying, oh, haha, Republicans don't get it. And to some degree, yeah, there's a lot of Republicans who don't get per capita here. But there's also another interesting midwit meme involved in this, where the low IQ guy is just looking at the map and saying, herder, I see more red than blue. And the midwit was going, ah, ha, ha, Republicans are dumb, they don't understand per capita. And perhaps maybe on that degree he's right. But then you have the more interesting nuanced take, which is when you start questioning the very legitimacy of universal suffrage. Because a long time ago, it really was just landowners who were able to vote. And was that fair back then? No, it wasn't. But the federal budget sure as heck was a lot more balanced. And so there's additional questions like that when it comes to per capita. Sometimes there's a quality over quantity take in addition to per capita. Which then leads to realizing that another thing with per capita is that you also have to look at the distribution. This is something a lot of people misunderstood in my previous videos in regards to the Groypers and the JQ. A lot of people thought that I was just suddenly going back on per capita and then suddenly not understanding per capita when it comes to the Jews. And perhaps I just didn't make it clear enough. So here's another explanation. When it comes to a population group having a disproportionately high amount of guilt per capita towards a certain problem, you also have to look at how the distribution goes. For example, let's say you're living in the US and there's 100 elves in the country. And out of these 100 elves, there are 300 thefts that take place per year. Now, that of course, as an ethnic group, is a very widely, ridiculously high amount of theft per capita compared to any other ethnic group. But consider two different models. In Model A, you have one elf out of these 100 elves committing 300 acts of theft, and a local judge just keeps letting that one elf walk free for some strange reason. And then in Model B, all 300 elves commit anywhere between 2 to 4 thefts per year. Now in both of these models, technically per capita, they're the same. But of course, they're both very widely different in terms of what's going on. From a purely consequentialist perspective, you could, in theory, justify arguing throwing all the elves out based on Model B. But you obviously can't make that argument based on Model A. And of course, in both cases, we're still really only looking at 100 elves here. So as long as your society's normal method of dealing with thieves is in place, as long as that's functioning, it's not really a big thing to be concerned with. As long as that system is in place, the elves that are actually guilty of doing something wrong will end up removing themselves. At absolute worst, it could justify people being a bit more suspicious of elves in the country, but not much more than that. Going back to the bear question, saying that the solution to the problem would be to mobilize the entire United States military to remove the elvish menace would also, in this situation, be a very silly, very ridiculous, very unnecessary overreaction. And that's assuming Model B. In Model A, the solution is even more obvious. Just make sure that one elf actually gets punished for their crimes, or at the very least is physically removed from the rest of society so they can no longer commit those crimes. And that's the issue I was trying to point out with Groypers and the JQ. They get hyper-fixated on Jews because they forget that there's more to statistical reasoning and more to understanding solutions than just per capita. You have to look at both the distribution and you have to look at the greater context of what's really going on. Because in the case of the JQ, their issue is mainly just having a disproportionately high representation in backroom corrupt deals, lobbying, foreign aid, influence in the bureaucratic state, as well as the cathedral of academia and media. And of course, it also should be pointed out that the distribution in this is much closer to Model A here. Most Jews aren't actually involved. It's really just a high representation in the top 1% of elites. And what a lot of times I'll see happen is that noticers will notice this and basically fall into this rabbit hole of completely counterproductive, ridiculous anti-Semitism. They will conclude that because of this high per capita influence, then removing of the Jews is somehow the highest political importance. When in reality, no, it's not. The real solution to the bureaucratic state is to just abolish the bureaucratic state. Like, for example, when it comes to foreign aid, what really needs to happen is that our politicians shouldn't be allowed to even give out foreign aid. And when that happens, the fact that Israel gets a disproportionately high amount of foreign aid, well, at that point, it wouldn't even matter anymore. That's the point I was trying to make. While their contributions to these problems is high per capita, because the total number of the problem is not that high, it doesn't meaningfully change the solution to these problems away from just abolishing these institutions outright and taking powers away from politicians that they shouldn't have to begin with. That is the flip side of per capita that a lot of people don't really get. There's a lot more to statistics and strategy and understanding what's going on in the world and how to fix it than just per capita. Per capita is important, but it's not everything. Anyways, hopefully that clears a few things up. Thanks for watching. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to support me, you can do so on Ko-Fi, Subscribestar, or by buying some merch. That is all for now. Till next time.